Hey team, Lawrence here. Welcome back to the AIRTOC demo series. Today we're walking through one of the most important governance documents in monitoring and controlling, the change request. Let's go. In this lesson, I'll explain what a change request is, why it matters, and how it's used to protect project scope, schedule, cost, and quality. Then we'll jump into a live AIRTOC demonstration where you can see exactly how to generate a change request using the AIMPM Project Management Coach. Let's begin with PMI's definition. According to PMI, a change request is a formal proposal to modify any project document, deliverable, or baseline. Change requests can result from various circumstances, such as issues identified during the project, new stakeholder requirements, corrective or preventative actions, or other needs to adjust the project plan. This is a good definition, but there's a lot more to consider when it comes to a change request. Let's take a look. Now, our definition is essentially the same as PMI's, but here we would like to point out a very important concept in change management, the impacts. Here we point out some of the most likely areas of change on your project. Over the years, there's been a lot of debate in project management world about a concept called the iron triangle. The concept explains that if anything changes on your scope, timeline, or budget, then other areas will be affected. So for example, if your scope changes, then most likely your budget and your timeline will also change. Now, some argue that you could even include resources into the mix, which makes it the iron box. At AIMPM, we argue that it goes way beyond the iron box, in fact. If any of the elements you see on screen are affected, it will affect other areas of the project. So for example, if the deliverables are slow, that affects your timeline and your budget. If the quality standards aren't met, that may end up ending the entire project itself. If project baselines aren't realistic, you'll experience timeline issues. So while iron triangle and iron box principle remains true on its surface, I want you to think deeper when it comes to change. It's usually the smaller issues like inefficient schedules that force change in the overarching areas like the scope, the timeline, or the budget. So what's in a change request? A change request should describe what is changing, why the change is needed, the impact on the project, the recommended actions, and the decisions required to actually make the change. It's the primary mechanism for controlling project change. And since we're speaking from a project change perspective and not an institutional or cultural change perspective, we don't have to get too deep into the details about change impacts. The one thing you do need to understand is that change affects people. This is the most important aspect of change, if you ask me. And when you present a change on a project, you're going to present the numbers and the schedule adjustments and the impacts. But don't forget to add the human element into the impact statement. Sometimes that human element is actually what determines whether or not that change is approved or rejected. Change requests are essential because they ensure visibility, control, traceability, accountability, governance, and protection. So in other words, you want to make sure that nothing changes without being documented. All of your changes must be analyzed before they're approved. Every change is recorded, justified, and tracked. Decision makers own the approvals. Changes cannot bypass the project plan, and the project manager cannot be blamed for any unapproved changes if you follow these directives. Without a formal change request process, you invite scope creep, cost overruns, schedule delays, and stakeholder misalignment. These are the things that derail projects. Change requests sit at the heart of the integrated change control process. If your company doesn't have a change control process, help them implement one. Without a controlled process, changes lack the approval structures needed to be effective. As changes come in, they must be analyzed. Not every change is a good change, and so they should be analyzed by the project team to determine whether or not that change is beneficial, and this is the first step. If the team decides that the change is feasible, further communication would need to take place, not only to the leadership for a decision, but also to the people who will be impacted by that change. This is the human element check. If the people who are affected by the change push back and strongly reject it, this is information that you want to bring to leadership first, because that will help them make a decision. The numbers may make sense, but if the people don't want the change, it may not make sense to actually implement it. Friction costs a lot more than you think. If you're able to communicate the change, gain buy-in from the people, and the team is on board, at that point, you can seek approval from leadership. Once the change is made, track it to ensure the change has the intended impacts, and you should be good to go. Now that we've covered what a change request is and why it's essential, Let's walk through how to build one using the AIRTOC framework. I'm going to switch to the live demo now so we can see how to construct this in AIRTOC with the AIMPM Project Management Coach. Let's go. Okay, team, before we dive into change requests, there's always a few things that we like to get squared away before we go into our demonstration. For the sake of time and simplicity, we'll be using simulated minimal data. In real projects, you'll likely have far more context than what we're showing today. Even with simplified data, though, you'll still see how powerful AIRTOC prompts can be. And remember, the more context you add, the better the output. Lastly, this process applies to every AIRTOC template in the textbook. The workflow is universal and repeatable across all deliverables. Okay, so let's dive into the demonstration here. And before we get too deep, we always like to cover all of the components of the demonstration before we dive in. So the first thing you're going to see is the AIRTOC template for change requests. This is the same template that you'll find inside of your AIRTOC library, as well as your textbooks. Below that, we have a real-world scenario where we're going to gather our data from in order to draft the change request, and this information will be processed into our actual query, which is where you're going to find your simulation data. And again, we always break out one more row at the bottom here just to show you guys the difference between input data for context, which is very high level, and your data inputs. Last but not least, you have your AIMPM Project Management Coach, which is exclusive to AIMPM members, and we're going to use this today to place our query. All right, let's get started. Okay, so starting off at the top, we have our AIRTOC template for change requests. On the left-hand side here, you have your AIRTOC framework. So that's your AI platform, your role, task, and output, as well as your context. And below that, AI produces, which is really just an example of what AI should produce once you're done entering the information into your query. All right, so let's start back at the top. The AI platform is going to be Gemini or ChatGPT. The role is going to be a change manager or project manager. The task is going to be to draft a document change request, consolidating details of the proposed modification, impacts, and approvals. And your output is going to be a formal change request submitted for review and governance decision. Here we have our inputs for context, which includes scope, our baseline problem and goal, constraints, risks, stakeholders, etc. Below that, we have our more detailed data, which includes change descriptions, impact data, risk data, approval data, tracking data. And again, this information may be in separate documents that you have to drag into the query. Let's take a look at the scenario. Our scenario says, during an audit interview, finance identified a compliance gap. The current workflow only supports 2 approval tiers, but transactions over 250,000 require a 3rd tier under corporate controls. Updating the approval process would impact workflow configuration, SLA routing logic, and ERP validation, and could delay UAT unless addressed quickly. Vendor engineering notified the PM that implementing this enhancement requires a 3-week configuration lead time, affecting the project's remaining schedule buffer. The PMO flagged that remaining contingency was limited, and unapproved changes risk scope creep, increased costs, and rework across existing workflows. Project manager was instructed to prepare change request CR014 with full impact analysis and routed through the Change Control Board, CCB, for approval before Q4 audit cycle. All right, so pretty detailed scenario here. We'll take that information and we'll apply it to our actual template. All right, so again, your AI platform, your role, task, and output won't change very much. We have some information for scope, the problem and goal here. We have our constraints, we have our risks, we have our stakeholders. Now we add in the change description, we add in some impact data, we add in our risk data, approval data, tracking data. So now AI has the information from additional pieces of context. We understand the scenario. Okay, let's go ahead and copy and paste this into our project management coach. All right, so we'll just hit Control C, Control V. And again, I'm not adding in any additional context here. All of the context that I need is within that prompt query. Okay, the same template that we've been using, we just copy and paste it in. AIMPM Project Management Coach knows what to do when it receives an AIRTOC template. So let's go ahead and hit go, and let's see what we get back. All right, so we have change request for CR014. We have the title, status, CCB review date, okay. The requester is the finance director, the project, and some impacted scope items, okay. Then we have our change description, our business and compliance justification, our impact analysis, our schedule impact, our cost impact, our resource impact. Risk assessment is here. Then we have some alternatives. We have dependencies and integration considerations, stakeholder impact summary, approval routing, and then a recommendation that the project manager may be able to give. Okay, so these are all of the components that you want inside of a change request. Not only did we ask for them inside of the prompt, the AIMPM Project Management Coach is trained to deliver this type of output. So again, this is fairly complete, right? I can take this, iterate through it maybe once or twice. If I wanted to take specific individual sections of this, I can definitely elaborate on them, depending on how much context I have added in previously. This is how you get a change request done. Something that may take a full day, a couple of days to do, you can get this done in around 10 to 15 minutes, okay? Have a full document that's ready to go. You may review it once or twice, but for the most part, you have an 80 to 90% complete document here based on the amount of context that you gave to the AI. And again, this is the power of AIRTOC, taking a minimal set of data, putting it into the proper prompt format, feeding AI that data, and then watching the magic happen. The magic is really in the prompt and the context. This is the way that you get these type of outputs, folks. All right, we'll see you in the next video. Thanks. We'll see you soon.